to another episode of Ultimate Punching, the ultimate MMA channel. I've got an MMA fighter with me who fights with the PFL, Kaytlin, and I've been a fan and a follower of hers since 2020, before I even knew I wanted to do an MMA YouTube channel. So she was nice enough to agree to talk with me today, and I really appreciate that. So we're going to get to know her, get to know what her life is like as a fighter, life of the PFL, and all of that fun stuff. So first of all, I wanted to just ask you, what's your background? How did you get into MMA? How did you get into fighting? Was this something you kind of grew up with, or did you kind of just stumble upon it?
Yeah, so I grew up doing dance, gymnastics, and cheer, and then I went and tried out for the college cheer team, and they were looking for flyers, so girls that you throw up in the air, and I was always the girl underneath that like lifted the girls up in the air. So I didn't make the college cheer team, and I knew I wanted to do a sport and stay active, so I was thinking like CrossFit or bodybuilding. But then my friends took me to some MMA fights, and there was one female fight on the card, and I'm like, I'm gonna do that. So I just found a gym and started training.
That's really interesting because I mean, we're starting to see more and more female fighters kind of come up and seeing that aspect grow in popularity. But back when you first started, like, what was it like being, one of the few probably females in your gym and kind of coming up and learning how to train and fight and all that stuff?
Yeah, I wasn't only one of the few females in my gym. I was probably one of the few females in my state. So I grew up in Utah, and it's still hard to get women into the gym to this day. But I didn't care. I was so naive that I was just like, I don't care. I'll train with boys. I'll train with girls, whatever. And I kind of just like walked into a gym as a clean slate. But yeah, it's been pretty interesting watching the sport grow and watching more and more females get involved, because when I first started, women weren't even allowed in the UFC. So it's cool to see it evolve that much.
So when would that have been? Because I think, what was it, about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, women weren't allowed in the UFC. So you must have started around that time?
No, so it was just like probably, I started 12 years ago. So it's probably like a year or two after I started. So I was still an amateur, but it was when Ronda made her debut against Liz Carmouche.
Okay, perfect. So like after you went in there, you saw that, you say, hey, I want to do this. At what point did you sort of decide, okay, I want to do this professionally? Was it like right when you saw that first fight, or was it, you had a few amateur fights and then you're like, okay, I think I can make a run at this?
It was when I first saw that fight. I was like, I could do that. Why not? I was so naive. And I think that actually worked to my benefit, because if I would have known how much hard work and dedication and like all the injuries and stuff that would have happened like beforehand, it probably would have scared me away from doing it. So I'm glad that I walked into a gym without knowing a single thing. Like, I literally didn't know what a jab was. I didn't know what a cross was. I didn't know what a double leg was. Nothing. Like, I only knew cheerleading before.
That's interesting. And so what was the first time showing up like? What was the first practice like, the first sort of training session? Was it something where you kind of had a moment like, oh, like this is amazing, or humbling? Like what kind of went through your mind after that first session?
So my dad actually bought me privates for my birthday. So I had like just a private coach helping me and teaching me how to strike, which I think actually helped me a ton, because then I wasn't overwhelmed with everybody else in the class. So I learned the basics in that private, and it was like a kickboxing class, and I just like learned on the bag how to throw a punch. And after that, I just loved it. I thought it was so cool. It was so fun. I felt like I was so like badass and just a little bit like edgy, because I grew up in a very like conservative community. So it was like really different that I am out there fighting, but I loved it from the get-go.
That's really interesting, because especially for a lot of, like, we're seeing it grow like we talked about, but a lot of the time, and I've seen this on some of your social media posts, right? Like, this is kind of a men's sport, a boys sport, and I even see in the comment section a lot of times like, hey, I can still beat you up. So when you see posts like that, when you see, people make those comments, things like that, what goes through your mind?
I don't really care. Like, I don't, I feel like I get told to go back to the kitchen at least like once or twice a day. And then I get men getting mad, being like, I don't care if you're a professional fighter, I can still beat you up, or my teenage son can still beat you up. Like, what do you have to prove? Like, I'm not trying to fight you guys. Like, why did you even comment that or say that? Like, that is the weirdest thing ever. So I just, I kind of just like rolled my eyes. I'm like, you're an idiot. But other than that, I don't really think much about it.
Yeah. So I find it kind of, I just find it interesting when people say that, because like when you look at almost any other professional sport out there, right? Like nobody would go on the internet and say to a professional golfer, like, I could beat you at golf, right? Or I could beat, but with fighting, it seems like such a, because it's like the most real thing, I think it hurts people's egos to know that like they couldn't do anything, right?
Yeah.
I train a little bit here and there, and I just know like there are people in my gym, nicest people I've ever met in my whole life, that can just like that. I'm toast, right? And so it's very humbling, but I don't think a lot of people can handle that type of thing, like mentally or even emotionally, right? So I just find it very interesting.
Totally. Yeah. It's funny that they'll say stuff, and it's mostly the people who say stuff that probably would lose in a fight against a woman. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the classic things that you hear from people who don't train? One of them I always hear is, yeah, sometimes I just see red, and then it's game over. What are some other classics that people comment to you on social media and that type of thing?
Yeah, I think just that big thing is like, I see red, or people, or I couldn't do that because I would just hurt people, or I'm trying to think. There's just so many funny things that people say. I can't like really pinpoint one right now, but there's a bunch on there. Like, if you just go through and look at any of my videos that have gone viral, then you're like, oh, okay, people are a little unhinged on social media.
Yeah, I do think it's funny. So one of the things I wanted to just sort of ask you about, what does a typical day look like for you as a professional fighter? Like how long ago was it that you signed with the PFL?
Yeah, so I signed with the PFL last March. And a typical day for me when I'm in a camp, I'll wake up, I eat the same breakfast every day. I go to the gym, then I come home and I'll do some of my personal training. So I have a fitness coaching business that I do, and
Okay.
that takes up a lot of my free time. Then I'll go back to the gym at night and maybe do some either strength and conditioning or jujitsu or a private session. And then I go home, eat some dinner, and go to bed. But it's a very strict and rigid schedule when I'm in camp. But outside of camp, I mean, right now I'm just recovering from an injury. So I'm mainly more just focusing on physical therapy and focusing on that and treating that as my training. So I'm really trying to focus on getting my leg as strong as I can because I tore my ACL, and then still working on my coaching business. And so I still try to stay as active as I can and get as strong as I can. And then of course, just like focus on making money with that coaching business.
So with the coaching business, do you kind of sort of use some of the training methodology that you use like with MMA and that type of thing for your clients? Does that influence, like how you train people, or do you kind of just keep the two things separate, or is it maybe a mixture of both?
So it's a little bit mixed in both, and it depends on the client's goals. Like if it's just a fat loss client, then I'll focus on like calorie deficit, weightlifting program, and stuff like that. And then I'll have athletes that come in and are interested in working with me just because they don't really know what to do when it comes to weight training. So they're good at like jujitsu, Muay Thai, they go show up to class, they get all that done. But then when they're in an actual like weight training gym, they're lost. And so I've put together programs for athletes too. But majority of my clients are like fat loss clients. So I help them burn fat, build muscle, and then kind of develop those healthy habits. But I do think it has helped a ton being a professional fighter and cutting weight so many times, because I'm constantly reminded how hard it is to achieve that goal and like what your mindset needs to be in a calorie deficit or to achieve a body weight goal and stuff like that. So I definitely can relate to a lot of my clients, and I know how to do it to a T. So I can definitely help them do that. So I think it's definitely benefited me in that way, and it's been pretty awesome.
That's really interesting. I definitely see how that can really help. How is cutting weight? Like, I think you're straw weight, correct?
I'm a flyweight, so 125.
Flyweight. So how does that how does like the nutrition how does a weight cut typically go? Like how long do you need to give yourself in order to make the weight for a fight?
So I need at least 4 weeks. So I typically walk around between like 140 and 150 pounds, or 145 and 150 pounds. So I cut anywhere between like 20 and 25 pounds. So I need at least 4 weeks to do that. I prefer 6. But I'll just try to diet down as close as I can the weeks leading up to the fight. And it is decently easy as long as I'm keeping my food in check and my calories in check. And then once I get to fight week, I hope I'm around like 135-ish, give or take 3 pounds. And then I will cut out like sodium and carbs, and then my body will start kind of just releasing water naturally. And then I cut the rest of the like 5 to 7 pounds of water the night before and the morning of.
That's that's interesting. I look at all the weight cuts that people do, and it looks so friggin' difficult that and there's been some conversations just sort of in the online MMA space about having something closer to like same day weigh-ins where fighters actually fight closer to their natural weight. What's your sort of take on that?
That would be really nice. So I don't have to cut all the way to 125. Just because if I cut to 135, these girls, like the girls that I'd be fighting are huge. Like they're walking around like 170. And I'm like, I just don't get that big. I'm like, I cannot fight at that weight class. So I would prefer that. So I don't have to cut all the way to 125. But it is what it is as right now. So I just put up with it, but it does feel like a small form of torture. Each time you have to do it, you're like, okay, now I'm going to go lose 10 pounds of water. Like, here we go again.
Yeah. It looks awful. Certainly something that I would never want to do, but that's why you guys are amazing, right? All the fighters out there, like I have so much respect for what fighters do, because I know myself, like I would never do it, right? So because I've trained and all this other kind of stuff, and just being on that stage in front of all the lights, I don't know, man. Just a huge amount of respect for any fighter who steps in the cage. To me is like way up here on the respect podium. So you kind of got started, around the time that Ronda Rousey was first getting started in MMA. Who was your inspiration, or is there a fighter that kind of inspired you? Was it Ronda? Was it them? Were there any other fighters that kind of inspired you to take this journey?
I mean, to take the journey, no, just the fighters that I watched on that local card. But in the beginning, like my favorite fighter was probably Holly Holm. I loved how she threw head kicks. And when she knocked out Ronda Rousey with a head kick, that was probably like one of my favorite moments ever in MMA. And so I would say Holly Holm at the beginning was like one of my absolute favorite fighters. And then I also liked Miesha Tate. I liked watching her on The Ultimate Fighter. And then I also really like Rose Namajunas. Rose Namajunas is still one of my top fighters today.
And so it's interesting. First of all, I love Rose. I think she's such a badass, but she just seems like such a kind person. Like I never met her, obviously, but like she just seems like such a kind person to like talk to and hang around with. But she's nasty when she's in there, which is pretty cool. So for you, if there was a dream fight that you could create for yourself, location, fighter, anytime in history, who would it be?
I would fight Paige Vanzant, and I would like to make that my UFC debut or something like that. Or I would even fight her on PFL today. But I think that would be like such a fun fight for me, because I did look up to Paige Vanzant when she was earlier on in her career. And I met her at, I think it was my last fight. And then my last 2 fights, I met her because she works with the PFL. And she's just as bubbly and as nice as you would think as she was, like what you see online and stuff. So yeah, it would be Paige Vanzant.
Paige Vanzant. Okay, that's interesting. And out of all the places you've fought, like, do you have a favorite location that you've traveled to for a fight?
I'm going to have to say just fighting in my hometown, Salt Lake City. I like fighting with a home crowd. I like going to my home afterwards. I like the comfort of being in my own city. So I'm going to have to say, yeah, Salt Lake City is my favorite place to fight. Even though I fought in like Madison Square Garden, San Antonio, Miami, I'm going to say home.
Okay. What do you prefer? Do you prefer the stand-up side of MMA or the grappling?
So I'll probably, it depends on my mood and the day. So there's like, I go through like ebbs and flows. Like there's times where I love grappling. All I want to do is grappling. I just want to go to jiu-jitsu. And then there's times where I'm like, I like striking. I don't even want to go to the ground. I'm just going to stay striking. But I really like wrestling, and wrestling doesn't like me because that's when I always get injured. That's how I tore my ACL last, is with wrestling. And yeah, I don't know. I kind of just like it all, but it depends on my mood.
So one thing I kind of wanted to ask you, because I got my first little bit of cauliflower here.
Oh,
I
wow.
trained some jujitsu here and there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming. So coming up to the big leagues. But anyway, I found that the absolute worst part about that was trying to sleep, because I would sleep on my side, and every single time I would turn, it would just be like, and then it would wake me up, right? So
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, what is it like, during the fight, a lot of fighters say they don't even feel anything because all that adrenaline is going. But I imagine that after you go through a fight, everything hurts. I'm just assuming, right? So what's it like, trying to sleep and rest and stuff like that the next few weeks after a fight?
So I remember, I think it was probably my second amateur fight, and me and the girl went three-minute rounds. And afterwards, I just felt like I got hit by a train. Like I didn't want to sit down. I didn't want to lay down. I didn't want to stand. I didn't want anyone to touch me. I was just like, don't touch me. And my whole body is a bruise. I feel like I got hit by a train. So yeah, I mean, the night or 2 nights after, it hurts pretty bad depending on how the fight went. But other than that, after I think like 2 days, the inflammation dies down and the swelling and stuff. So it's not that bad. But typically the night of, it's really hard to sleep. Plus you have so much adrenaline and you're excited. If you won, you're just like stoked that you won. If you lost, you're bummed that you lost. So that's keeping you up. So there's definitely so many emotions that go into it too.
Yeah. So, I believe one of the things I always want to ask is, like, for you, how do you deal with the loss? Like, how do you come back from it? What are some things that you kind of do to maybe regulate yourself emotionally, or motivate you to go back and do it again? Like, what goes through your mind after you lose?
Yeah, so if I was doing the sport because I didn't want to lose, then I probably would have quit a few years ago when my record was like 1-3 as a professional. So I love competing. I love challenging myself. I love getting better. So after I lose, obviously it sucks. I'm down. I'm like beating myself up on the inside. But then I try to look at it in a way as to like, what can I improve on, or what can I take away from that fight? So my last fight, which I lost to a split decision, which I thought I personally got the decision. I was just like, that fight like eats me up inside because it was so close. And if I would have just thrown like a few more punches or landed a few more things or shot a takedown, I could have easily had the fight go my way. And so it's just things like that. Like I'll take away from that fight, like, okay, just do a little bit more, throw more, actually do your takedown and stuff like that. So it's just more of like, you can beat yourself up a little bit, you can be sad, but then also you have to like flip that around to be able to keep going in the sport. You have to take a learning experience from each fight and then try to get better and better each time.
That's interesting. There's a guy, the last guy I interviewed, he fights for Unified MMA up here in Canada. I'm in Canada, in case you didn't know.
Nice.
And then he was saying, yeah, just a lot of coaches and sort of the people that kind of build you up and things like that. So similar to kind of what you were saying. Who do you think who are your top 5 like favorite fighters of all time?
Top 5 favorite fighters. I'm gonna have to say Amanda Nunes. She was my coach on The Ultimate Fighter. Rose Namajunas, she's up there. And then I like Conor McGregor just because of the attention and eyes that he brings on the sport, and he just makes things fun, So that's why I like him. I also really like, let's see, Max Holloway, and probably, it's so hard to pick a top because there's so many fighters that I do like. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. And I have like so many fighters' names just like running through my mind, and I don't know who to pick for the last one.
Oh, list them all. I'm sure they'd appreciate it, right?
Yeah. So I like Bo Nichols. I like let's see, I really like Tisha Torres, Raquel Pennington, I like her. Misha Tate, obviously, Holly Holm. Yeah, I'm just gonna stop there.
Okay, sounds good. How is it fighting for the PFL? I'm trying to tune into them a little bit more. The first time I tried to tune into PFL, they didn't have anything available up in Canada, but now they do.
Oh,
They
dang it.
fixed it based on my complaints, so I appreciate that.
Good.
But how is it fighting for them?
They're a really great promotion to fight for. Like they really care about their fighters, which I really can appreciate. They've always treated me with respect. I like all the employees there. The employees are actually like really cool people. And so every time I see them, they're like, Kaytlin, what's up? And like we'll chat about stuff. And then they like actually pay me well, which is so nice being a fighter. I'm actually like making money in my career. And yeah, I think fighting for them is awesome. I actually make more with a PFL than I would have if I would have gotten the contract from the Ultimate Fighter. So I'm like, okay, there's a pro there.
That's good to hear. I do like I personally think that MMA is going to be probably the second biggest sport in the world, maybe in about 10 years time, maybe 15, something like that. But I really do think that MMA is going to be one of the top sports in the world. And just seeing like more variety, more competition, like if I can watch something on a Friday, on a Saturday, maybe on a Sunday, like I'm happy. So when is your next fight and when do you plan to compete? I know you said you're dealing with an ACL injury.
Yeah.
Was that from your last fight or just training?
It was from training for my last fight where my opponent pulled out and then I just went and weighed in. So I weighed in as an alternate. So I went through the entire fight camp, made weight, and then no other fights fell out. So I didn't end up fighting that night, which was probably a good thing because I didn't have an ACL. But yeah, I tore it then. And my next fight will probably be hopefully the $20-25 million tournament in the PFL.
Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully you win. That'd be some life-changing money for sure.
That would be worth it. That would make everything worth it.
So one of the other thing I kind of want to ask you is like, how do you see women's MMA and MMA in general just kind of growing and evolving? It's definitely more popular. There's definitely more female fighters, here now than there were even, 2-3 years ago from what I see. How do you see the sport growing and evolving, especially from the female side?
I think it has grown an insane amount. Like I used to know basically all the female fighters out there. And then now there's so many that pop up that I'm like, who's this person? Who's that person? Like I can't keep track of it, which is such a good thing because it was so hard for me to get fights back when I was an amateur because there was not really any other girls or in my region. There was a few girls that I fought already. And then the promotions were too broke to like fly girls in to fight me. And so it was like so difficult for me to get a fight back then. So it's really, really awesome to see so many fighters out there because it makes the sport better. And then also if you don't keep up, if you don't evolve, then you're going to get kicked out really quick. So I like that it's more competitive and that more people are doing it. And I think it's only like a positive thing.
That's interesting. And one of the other thing I kind of wanted to ask, like, if you could sort of give advice to females trying to come up, or just fighters in general trying to come up and get into this sport, like, what would be the advice that you would give them?
So my advice for fighters in the sport would be to just keep showing up. You're going to have the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. But don't let the highs get you too high and don't let the lows get you too low. Just keep showing up, putting in the work, and it's all going to pay off. Even if you win, even if you lose, just keep showing up. And with females, particularly, I'm going to say don't date your coach. Do not do that. Not because I have experience with it, but I just highly recommend to not date your coach.
Yeah, I've noted, like, I just train jujitsu. I don't do much else, but definitely the relationships that seem to happen in the gym. Somebody ends up leaving and never coming back from what I've
It's always
seen.
a mess.
So,
it's always a mess. I love watching it from the outside because I'm like, oh, that's going down right now. But I would hate it if I were in it. So if you take my advice, I think you should take my advice if you're a female in the gym.
Yeah. That actually, that actually got me thinking about something else. I don't remember the woman's name, but on one of Joe Rogan's podcasts, she basically talked about how she was dating this guy who was a fighter. He was getting beaten up, putting his hands up. She found that unattractive. She didn't want to date him anymore after that. I don't know if that happened or not. No idea. But just as a female fighter, like, does your guy need to know how to handle himself? Does he need to be a fighter, jiu-jitsu, some training at least, or that doesn't matter to you at all?
So they at least have to know how to like throw a punch or like defend themselves, because I'm not going to be the one defending both of us. And so I think they at least need to know how to throw a punch. And it is a very, very big ick for me if a guy throws a punch and they have no idea what they're doing and it's like bad form or technique, or they punch it like a gym bro or something. I'm like, okay, don't do that.
Okay, that's interesting. I did see that. I think you did a TikTok the other day where you were trying to teach a gym bro to throw a kick, but he did it wrong, and then just, oh no.
Yeah.
Which, like, I can't throw kicks very much. I did like a few months of Muay Thai, but that's about it. I stick to grappling because it's close to work. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome that you trained. So keep that up.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're just about at the end of the half hour here. First of all, I really appreciate your time. Really cool that I got to, talk with you, because I've been following you since 2020, and just kind of seeing that you're fighting in the PFL and, you're making your way up and things like that. It makes me happy. I always want the best for everybody. Right. The last sort of thing I just wanted to ask you a little bit about is, when your career is kind of all said and done from fighting, like, is there any type of legacy that you want people to look back and think of, like, okay, this is what Kaytlin did when she was fighting, and we want to emulate that?
So I think one of the biggest things I want to like leave behind with my career is that like I didn't give up. So I want people to watch my career and all the struggles that I went through, all the injuries. This is my third knee injury, and I've had other injuries. So I want them to see like the ups and downs, and then hopefully I'll end my career on a high. Obviously, that's to be determined. But I want them to see that it's not perfect, it's not easy. But if you push through those, you keep turning up, you keep working hard, you keep believing yourself, that you can achieve your dreams and what you're wanting to achieve. So that would be my main goal.
All right. Well, everybody, this has been Kaytlin Neal with the PFL. Huge fan. Thank you so much for showing up and doing this interview with me. And anything else you want to put out there? Anything we can plug? I mean, my channel's not huge, but it will be one day. I promise you that. So you can be one of the first few people to say, hey, I was on that before it was cool. So,
all right. Yeah. I mean, just follow me on Instagram if you want to come and hang out with me, and all the other social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. I hope I'm a good time on there. I like to make funny videos. They're cringy. Some people think they're cringy. Some people think they're funny. So
I think they're funny. I especially like the ones where the people are like, oh, I'm going to beat you up and you're a professional fighter. It makes me laugh and sort of shake my head. So
I'm glad you like it.
All right. Well, take care. Thank you so much. And we'll chat again soon. I'll make sure to tune into your next fight.
Of course. It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too.